The morning Eva Rourke buried her last coin beneath the floorboard of her rented room, she understood with crystalline clarity that she had exactly nothing left to lose. It was the spring of 1878, and the town of Millhaven, Texas, sat baking beneath a relentless April sun that showed no mercy to the desperate or the destitute. The main street was a churned ribbon of red dust, bordered on both sides by weathered storefronts that leaned into each other like tired old men. The smell of horse manure and saddle leather hung in the air, mixing with the faint sweetness of Mrs. Calloway's bakery 2 doors down from the boarding house where Eva had been slowly running out of options for the past 4 months. Eva was 28 years old. She had dark chestnut hair that she pinned back each morning with the same 2 bone hairpins her mother had given her before she passed, and her eyes were the color of creek water in autumn, a kind of shifting gray-green that changed depending on the light and her mood. She was not a soft woman, not anymore. Whatever softness had existed in her had been worn away by the last 3 years of her life, ground down like a river stone until what remained was something quieter and harder and more permanent. She had 2 children. Lily was 6, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn set to the jaw, and a habit of asking questions that no adult in her vicinity could answer satisfactorily. Thomas was 4, round-cheeked and sweet-natured, prone to finding wonder in beetles and puddles, and the particular way afternoon light came through a dusty window pane. They were the 2 best things in Eva's life and also the 2 most terrifying, because feeding them and keeping a roof over their heads required a steady stream of income that Eva was finding increasingly difficult to generate. Her husband, Daniel Rourke, had died 18 months ago. He had been a good man in the way that some men are good without being particularly strong, and his death had not been dramatic or heroic. He had taken a fever in the autumn of 1876 and been gone within a week, leaving Eva with a small farm outside of San Marcos that she had done her best to hold onto through the winter and into the following spring before the bank had made clear that she could not hold onto it any further. She had sold what she could, packed what mattered, and moved herself and the children to Millhaven because her cousin Agnes lived there and had written that there might be work. Agnes's idea of work had turned out to be washing other people's laundry, which Eva had done without complaint until the cold months made it difficult and the income made it impossible. She also took in mending, which she did by lamplight after the children were asleep. She helped Mrs. Calloway in the bakery on Saturdays for a small wage, and whatever bread was left unsold at the end of the day. She was surviving by inches, and she was beginning to understand that surviving by inches was not sufficient when you had a 6-year-old who needed new shoes and a 4-year-old who was starting to cough in a way that worried her at night. The problem was not simply money. The problem, as Eva understood it in the stark and honest way she had come to understand most things, was that Millhaven in 1878 offered precious few avenues for a woman in her position. She was not a widow with property or family money or the kind of connections that might open doors. She was not young enough or unencumbered enough to take the kind of jobs that were readily available. She was a woman with 2 small children and a reputation for being too proud to accept charity and too cautious to take risks, and those qualities, however admirable in theory, were not paying the rent. She was thinking about all of this on a Tuesday morning in April when she went to the general store to buy the week's supplies, calculating in her head what she could afford and what she would have to do without, when the door opened behind her and a man came in out of the dust. He was tall. That was the first thing she noticed, because he had to duck slightly to clear the low doorframe, and the movement was unhurried and automatic, as though he had spent a long time ducking through doorways and had made his peace with it. He wore a battered brown hat that had seen considerable weather, and a canvas coat the color of old wheat, and boots that were scuffed and functional rather than decorative. He was perhaps 32, she guessed, with a lean jaw shadowed by several days of growth and sun-darkened skin, and the kind of steady, quiet eyes that she associated with men who had spent a lot of time outdoors watching things happen and deciding whether to intervene. He nodded to her in the polite but unintrusive way of a man who acknowledges another person's existence without making a claim on their attention. Eva nodded back and returned to her mental accounting. She was counting out coins for a small sack of cornmeal when Thomas, who had been standing very still and good beside her, suddenly made a dash for the jar of penny candy on the counter with the efficiency of a child who has identified an opportunity and moved before parental instinct can intervene. He made it approximately 4 steps before his boot caught on an uneven plank in the floor, and he pitched forward with a sound of pure surprise. The tall man was closer to Thomas than Eva was. He moved without apparent thought, dropping into a crouch and catching the boy before he hit the floor, and Thomas looked up at him with an expression of profound astonishment, as though he had expected the floor and received something considerably better. "There you go," the man said, setting Thomas back on his feet with an easy gentleness that struck Eva even through the alarm of the moment. His voice was low and measured, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to be heard. "Floors will get you every time if you're not watching them." Thomas stared at him with the complete and unashamed assessment that only small children are permitted to make of strangers. "You are very tall," he said. "I have been told that," the man agreed. "My name is Thomas William Rourke." "Andrew Townsend," the man said, and extended one large, work-roughened hand. Thomas shook it with the seriousness of a small businessman concluding an important transaction. Eva reached them, took Thomas by the shoulder and said, "Thank you, he's quick when he wants something." Andrew Townsend straightened up, and for the first time she had a proper look at his face. He had kind eyes, she decided. Not soft but kind. There was a difference. The lines at the corners of his eyes suggested he smiled more than he frowned, and the general impression he gave was of a man who was comfortable with himself in a way that many men were not. "No trouble," he said. "Is he all right?" "He's indestructible," Eva said. "Unfortunately." The ghost of a smile moved across his face. He touched the brim of his hat and moved away toward the back of the store where the hardware supplies were kept, and that should have been the end of it. Except that Lily, who had been standing near the bolts of fabric with her arms folded in the manner of a very small adult waiting for a very tiresome errand to conclude, chose that moment to speak up. "Mama," she said, with the carrying clarity that children achieve when they are about to say something they have not been told is inappropriate, "that man saved Thomas. Shouldn't we invite him to supper?" Eva felt the familiar warmth of maternal mortification. "Lily, we could make the corn bread," Lily continued, with the relentless logic of someone who knows she is technically correct. "You said hospitality is important. You say it all the time." Andrew Townsend, to his credit, kept his eyes on the shelf of nails he was examining and gave no indication of having heard, though Eva suspected he had heard every word. "We'll discuss this later," Eva told Lily, and returned to the counter to finish her purchasing with what dignity she could muster. She did not think about Andrew Townsend again for 3 days. She had too many other things to think about. On Thursday, she was hanging laundry behind the boarding house when Agnes came out with 2 cups of coffee, and the expression she wore when she had something to say that she was not sure would be welcome. "There's a new man working over at the Hartwell Ranch," Agnes said, handing Eva a cup and settling onto the wooden step. Agnes was 34, comfortably built, with the cheerful practicality of a woman who had figured out what she could change and made her peace with the rest. "Came in last week. Foreman says he's the best horseman he's seen in 20 years. "That's interesting," Eva said, pinning a small shirt to the line. "Mrs. Hartwell says he's a good worker, quiet, doesn't drink much or cause trouble." Agnes wrapped both hands around her cup. "She also says he's a single man, unattached." Eva gave her cousin a level look. "Agnes, I'm just telling you what I heard. I have 2 children and a backlog of mending and approximately $9 to my name. I am not in a position to be thinking about unattached single men. Some people might say that's exactly when you should be thinking about them. Some people," Eva said crisply, can mind their own business. Agnes sipped her coffee and said nothing, which was a very eloquent kind of silence. Eva did not ask the man's name. She did not need to, because when she went to the Hartwell ranch 2 days later to deliver Mrs. Hartwell's mended curtains, she found Andrew Townsend in the yard by the barn, working a young horse on a long line with the patient, unhurried authority of a man who understands animals and is not in a hurry to prove it. He saw her come through the gate. He didn't stop what he was doing immediately because stopping abruptly would have unsettled the horse, and she noted that he understood this and that the understanding said something about his character. He walked the horse down to a calm and then handed the line to a younger ranch hand before crossing the yard toward her. Mrs. Rourke, he said. She was surprised he remembered her name. Mr. Townsend. She held up the wrapped curtains. I have a delivery for Mrs. Hartwell. She's in the house. I'll walk with you if that's all right. It was all right. She wasn't sure why she found it all right, but she did. They walked across the yard in the warm afternoon light, and he said, "How are your children?" "Thomas hasn't fallen through any floorboards since Tuesday," she said, "so I consider that a success." The smile came more fully this time, and it changed his face considerably, opening it up and making him look younger. "Good to hear. And the girl, Lily, was it?" "Lily is well. She is currently in a phase of asking questions about astronomy that I am completely unequipped to answer." "How old?" "6. Thomas is 4. He nodded. They reached the porch steps. He opened the door for her, which was straightforwardly courteous, and she went in and delivered the curtains and accepted the small payment from Mrs. Hartwell, who was a brisk, silver-haired woman who paid fair and on time and was therefore one of Eva's preferred customers. When she came back out, Andrew Townsend was waiting at the bottom of the porch steps. She was not sure whether to be pleased or wary about that, and in the absence of certainty she settled for neither. "Do you have far to go?" he asked. "Back to town, about a mile. I'm riding in this afternoon for supplies. I could walk with you," or he stopped himself, recalibrated. "Or not, if you'd prefer. I don't mean to presume." There was something in the directness of that, the way he left it entirely to her without pressing, that she found she respected. Most men who offered to accompany women on errands did so with an expectation attached, visible or not. He seemed to have no expectation beyond the offer itself. The company would be welcome, she said. They walked the mile back to town. She learned, in the way you learn things from a person who does not volunteer information but answers what is asked, that he was from Missouri originally, that he had worked ranches across Texas and into New Mexico territory, that he had come to Millhaven because a man he respected had told him the Hartwell operation was well run and the work was honest. He had no family that he mentioned. He seemed to take up the right amount of space in conversation, neither filling silence with meaningless words nor leaving such long pauses that she felt obligated to fill them herself. She told him more than she intended to. Not about the money, not directly, but about the farm in San Marcos, about Daniel, about the particular difficulty of arriving in a town as a stranger and trying to build a life from nothing. She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, and he listened with the same quality of attention he had given the horse in the yard, steady and genuine and unhurried. "It's not easy," he said. "What you're doing." "No," she agreed, "but it's what there is to do." They reached the edge of town where the road met the main street. He stopped there and touched his hat. "It was good to talk with you, Mrs. Rourke. And you, Mr. Townsend." He went one direction and she went the other, and she thought about their conversation all the way home and told herself firmly that it meant nothing and that she had larger concerns than the steady, kind eyes of a man who worked at the Hartwell ranch. She believed this sincerely for approximately 4 days. On the 5th day, she was sitting outside the boarding house in the early evening, watching Thomas chase a fat orange cat around the yard, while Lily sat beside her on the step reading haltingly from a primer, when Andrew Townsend rode up the street on a bay horse and saw them. He pulled up, and for a moment he just looked at the three of them, and she couldn't quite read his expression, but it was not unfriendly. "Evening," he said. "Evening," Eva said. Lily looked up from her primer with the direct, unself-conscious assessment she applied to everything. "You are the man who caught Thomas when he fell." "I am," he said. "Do you want to sit down?" Lily asked in the same tone she might use to invite a visiting dignitary. "There is a barrel over there. People sit on it." Eva thought about correcting this. She thought about it and then decided that the situation had already moved beyond correcting. Andrew Townsend looked at Eva. There was a question in the look that was entirely polite and entirely genuine, and she found herself nodding before she had fully committed to it. He dismounted, tied his horse at the post, and came and sat on the barrel that people apparently sat on, and Lily returned to her primer with the satisfied air of someone who has successfully managed a social situation. Thomas, upon noticing the new arrival, abandoned the cat immediately and came over to stand directly in front of Andrew and stare at him. "Do you have a gun?" Thomas asked. "Thomas," Eva said. "I do," Andrew said, "though I don't carry it in town unless I need to." "Have you ever shot anyone?" "Thomas William Rourke," Eva said. Andrew met her eyes briefly, and there was humor in his, controlled and warm. "I've fired it at things that needed discouraging," he told Thomas, which was the kind of answer that was technically honest without being unnecessarily dramatic, and Eva decided that was a wise choice with a 4-year-old. They sat there as the evening light turned golden and then pink, and the conversation ranged over things that seemed small but didn't feel small. He told Thomas about horses, which Thomas absorbed with an intensity that suggested a future vocation. He told Lily, when she showed him her primer, that he had learned to read from a Methodist minister in Missouri and had found it the most useful thing anyone had ever taught him. Lily considered this seriously and said that she was learning quickly and expected to finish the primer by summer, and he said that he had no doubt of it, and said it in a way that was not condescending but simply true. Eva watched him with her children and felt something loosen in her chest that she had not known was tight. When he stood to go, the light had gone to deep violet and the first stars were showing. "Thank you," he said to Eva, and she understood he meant for the company and the evening and the children being the children they were. "Thank you," she said back. He rode away, and she took the children inside, and she put them to bed and sat alone by the lamp for a long while, thinking about things she had not allowed herself to think about in a very long time. He came back the following Saturday. She was returning from the bakery with the week's leftover bread, and he fell into step beside her as naturally as if they had been making this walk together for years. He had brought Thomas a small carved horse he had made himself, plain and unpretentious but clearly rendered with care, and Thomas received it with a reverence that he normally reserved for very serious occasions. For Lily, he had brought a small book of illustrated birds that he had found in the general store, because he had remembered she asked questions, and a book that answered some of them seemed right. Eva looked at the gifts and then at him and felt something dangerously close to gratitude mixed up with something dangerously close to hope, and she was not sure she trusted either. "You didn't need to do that," she said. "No," he agreed, in a tone that suggested that was precisely the point. They walked to the boarding house and sat on the front step while the children occupied themselves, and she said, more directly than she had been speaking to herself, "Mr. Townsend, I need to be honest with you." He looked at her steadily. "I'd welcome that. I am a widow with 2 children and a great deal of uncertainty about the future," she said. "I have very little to offer anyone in the way of material comfort or ease. I work constantly, and I am tired more often than I would like, and I have no particular prospects." She said it plainly because she had discovered that saying it plainly was less painful than allowing it to be discovered slowly. "I say this because I think you are a good man and I don't want you to have a mistaken impression of my situation." He was quiet for a moment, not uncomfortable, just quiet in the way of a man who takes words seriously and does not respond to them carelessly. "Mrs. Rourke," he said. "Eva." He paused, testing the name, and she let it pass. "I appreciate you telling me that. And I'd like to be equally direct if you'll allow it. Please. I have been working ranches since I was 17 years old," he said. I have money enough put by to buy a modest piece of land and build a decent house on it. I don't drink to excess or gamble away my wages. I work hard because I find satisfaction in it, not because I have to. I'm a man who has spent a considerable number of years perfectly alone. He looked out at the street, and something moved briefly across his face, something she couldn't entirely read, but that felt real. I have always wanted a family, not in an abstract way. In the way that a man knows what his life is missing. I'm 33 years old and I have not found that, not because I haven't looked, but because I have not been willing to settle for something that wasn't the right thing. Back at her. I'm not here on a mistaken impression. I'm here because I like talking to you and I like your children and I find myself wanting to come back. Eva looked at him for a long moment. The evening sounds of Millhaven went on around them, boots on the boardwalk, the distant sound of a piano from the saloon 2 blocks over, a horse's gentle complaint at the hitching post. That is very direct, she said. You said you preferred it. I do. She folded her hands in her lap. I have to be careful, she said, not because I am not moved by what you've said, but because my children are involved and anything I do touches them. I understand that, he said. I'm not asking for anything tonight except the chance to keep showing up. She looked at him again. The lamplight from the window reached his face at an angle, and she could see the honesty in him, the steadiness that was not performed. All right, she said. You can keep showing up. He did. He came on Saturday afternoons and sometimes on Wednesday evenings, and sometimes he would stop by the general store at the same time she was there, which she suspected was not entirely accidental, but which she appreciated for the grace with which it was not acknowledged as a deliberate thing. He brought Thomas to the Hartwell Ranch once on a Saturday, with Eva's permission, and let the boy sit on the gentlest mare in the stable, and Thomas spoke of it for 2 weeks afterward as the defining event of his existence. He helped Eva without making it feel like help. When the boarding-house landlord, a tight-fisted man named Grover Webb, mentioned in Eva's hearing that he might need to raise the room rate, Andrew appeared at Webb's office the following afternoon and entered into a conversation about certain repairs to the building that had been long deferred, the details of which Eva never learned, but after which the rate did not go up. He did not tell her he had done this. She found out from Agnes, who found out from someone who had been passing the office at the time and heard raised voices. When she confronted him about it, he looked at her steadily and said, "You were right that it was my business. I'd do it again." "It was not your place," she said, though she was fighting the urge to smile. "Maybe not," he said, "but I was not willing to stand by." She looked at him, this tall, quiet, thoroughly decent man, and she thought about what it would mean to stop being afraid of wanting things. "You are very stubborn," she told him. "I have been told that too," he said. May turned warm and sweet, and with it came the kind of easy familiarity that feels like it should have taken much longer but somehow hasn't. She stopped calling him Mr. Townsend entirely somewhere around the middle of the month, and he had been calling her Eva since approximately their 3rd conversation. The children adored him with a wholeheartedness that had initially concerned her and now simply moved her. Thomas had taken to asking when Andrew arrived whether he had brought the horse, meaning the carved one, as though checking on its welfare. Andrew always responded as though this was a completely reasonable thing to be concerned about. Lily interrogated him regularly on subjects ranging from the migratory patterns of birds to why the sky was blue to whether Missouri was bigger than Texas, and he answered what he could and admitted what he could not with an equanimity that she clearly respected. It was Lily who said it first, with the directness of a 6-year-old who has decided to name the thing that everyone else is carefully not naming. They were eating supper, and Andrew had been invited because Eva had discovered that she liked having him at the table, liked the easy way he sat and the way the light fell on his face, and Lily put down her fork and looked at him with her most serious expression. "Andrew," she said, "are you going to marry my mother?" There was a silence in which Eva became very interested in the cornbread on her plate. "Lily," she said, "I am asking," Lily said reasonably, "because Thomas wants to know and he is too shy to ask, and I am not shy." Thomas, from across the table, appeared to be doing his utmost to be invisible. Andrew looked at Eva first, a careful and considerate look, and then he looked at Lily. "That is a very serious question," he said. "I know," Lily said. "What do you think about it?" he asked her. Lily considered this with appropriate gravity. "I think Mama is lonely sometimes even when she tries not to show it, and I think she is happier when you come. And Thomas and I like you very much, so I think it would be good." She reached for her fork again with an air of having completed her contribution. "But it's Mama's choice, because she is the grown-up." Eva looked up from her cornbread and Andrew was looking at her, and the look was so open and so full of the thing he had been careful not to press her about that she felt it directly in the center of her chest. "We will have that conversation," Andrew said, "in the appropriate way and at the appropriate time." He looked at Lily. "But thank you for being honest about it." "You're welcome," Lily said, and returned to her supper as though she had simply asked to have the butter passed. After the children were in bed, Eva and Andrew sat on the front step in the warm May night, and the conversation that Lily had opened sat between them like a door ajar. "I'm sorry," Eva said. "She has no filter between thought and speech." "I like that about her," Andrew said, and he meant it. Silence for a moment, the comfortable kind. "She wasn't wrong," he said. Eva looked at the stars. There were a great many of them out, the wide, uncrowded Texas sky doing what it did best. "Andrew," she said carefully, 3 months ago I had buried my last coin under a floorboard, and I was trying to decide whether I could afford shoes for my daughter before winter. My life it is not simple, and it has not been simple, and I have not had the luxury of thinking about things like." She stopped. "Like what?" he said. "Like whether someone might actually want to take it on." He was quiet. Then he said, "I don't think of it as taking something on. I think of it as." He stopped too, and she watched him find the words with the careful attention he gave to finding the right words. "I think of it as getting to be part of something that already matters. Lily and Thomas and you. That's not a burden to manage, Eva. That's a life I would be grateful for." She looked at him. The starlight was kind to his face, and she studied it without apology, the jaw and the eyes and the mouth that smiled more easily now than it had when she first knew him, as though his face had warmed to the proximity of her and the children. "You really do mean that," she said. "I have never said a thing to you that I did not mean." "I know," she exhaled. "That is both very reassuring and very unnerving." He laughed then, a real laugh, low and warm, and it was one of her favorite sounds. She reached over and put her hand on top of his where it rested on his knee, and he turned his hand over and held hers with a gentleness that was also, unmistakably, entirely certain, and they sat like that for a long time in the warm May dark. He asked her properly on a Sunday afternoon in June. He had taken her and the children for a walk along the creek at the edge of town, and the water was low and bright, and Thomas was attempting to catch something in the shallows, while Lily sat on a rock and drew in a small sketchbook that Andrew had brought her. The light was exactly the kind that made everything look important, slanted and golden through the cottonwood leaves. He stopped walking and she stopped with him, and she knew from the particular quality of his stillness what was coming, and she found that she was not afraid. "Eva," he said. He reached into the pocket of his coat and brought out a ring. It was a simple one, a narrow gold band with a small setting, not grand but carefully chosen and clearly real. "I have spoken to you about what I want, and I hope I have shown you that my intentions are serious and my character is what I say it is. I am asking you to marry me, not because I think you need saving, because you are the most capable woman I have ever known. I am asking you because I love you, and because I love your children, and because I want to build a life with all 3 of you." Eva looked at the ring, and then at his face, and then at Lily on her rock and Thomas in the creek, and she felt the thing she had been carefully not feeling for months come up through her chest with a warmth she had not experienced in so long that it was almost startling. "I love you too," she said. It was the first time she had said it to him, and it came out steadier than she expected, like something she had been carrying for a long time that was finally allowed to be set down. "Yes, Andrew, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger and his hand shook just slightly, just enough to tell her that the steadiness she admired was real but hard one, and she thought that was one of the best things she had ever learned about him. Lily looked up from her sketchbook with the expression of someone whose predictions have been confirmed. "Mama," she called, "did he ask you?" "He did," Eva called back. "Good," Lily said and returned to her drawing. Thomas from the creek said, "Are we having cake?" "Eventually," Andrew said. "Excellent," Thomas said and went back to his fishing. The wedding took place in July, which was an objectively unreasonable month to hold a wedding in Texas, but which was the month everyone had agreed to. Agnes organized it with the efficiency of a woman who considers organization her highest calling. Mrs. Hartwell offered the ranch for the occasion, which was generous and practical, and the minister from the Methodist church in town, a tired-looking but warmly disposed man named Reverend Cole, performed the ceremony in the shade of the great live oak in the Hartwell yard. Eva wore a dress she had made herself from fabric Agnes had helped her choose, a blue-gray that suited her eyes and which she had embroidered at the collar and cuffs with small flowers in white thread. She wore her hair down except for 2 braids pinned at the back, and she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Lily and Thomas had gathered that morning, with the serious dedication of people assigned an important task. Andrew wore his good coat, which he had cleaned and pressed, and a white shirt and a string tie, and when he saw her come out of the Hartwell house and across the yard toward him, he went very still for a moment, and the look on his face was the look of a man who has been given something he did not entirely expect to receive. The ceremony was short and genuine. Reverend Cole had been doing this long enough to tell the difference between people who meant what they said and people who were simply going through a socially expected motion. And the words that Eva and Andrew said to each other were said in the former spirit and received that way. When Andrew kissed her for the first time in front of everyone, it was unhurried and tender, and she heard Agnes make a small sound that she suspected was entirely emotional. Thomas, afterward, ate 3 pieces of the cake that Mrs. Hartwell's cook had made and had to be carried home asleep. Lily danced with 2 of the ranch hands and with Andrew, who was an adequate dancer and who made up for any deficiency by being entirely willing, and she declared the whole event a success with the air of someone who had expected nothing less. They moved that same month into the house Andrew had been building. He had not told her about it directly, which she later understood was because he had wanted to finish it before he said anything. It was on a piece of land he had purchased a mile south of town, not large but well situated, with good soil and a spring that ran reliably. He had been working on it in his off hours for weeks with the help of 2 ranch hands from the Hartwell operation who were apparently devoted to him, a fact that she found entirely believable. The house was modest, 2 rooms downstairs and a sleeping loft, solidly built of good timber with a covered porch that faced west and caught the evening breeze. "I can add more rooms," he said, when he showed it to her for the first time. He said it with a particular casualness that was not entirely casual. "That would be practical," she said, matching his tone. He looked at her sidelong. "I'm a practical man." "You are," she agreed. They stood on the porch in the July evening heat and looked out at the land that was now improbably theirs, and she felt the newness of it and the rightness of it layered together in a way that she thought she would remember exactly as it was. The children settled into the new house with the adaptability that children possess, and that adults spend their whole lives trying to recover. Lily immediately claimed the best corner of the loft for her sketchbooks and her bird book and her primer, and Thomas laid a proprietary claim to the back step as a base of operations for his various explorations of the property, which was already populated by a satisfying array of beetles, lizards, and what he claimed was a rabbit hole, though no rabbit had as yet confirmed this. Andrew rose before dawn every morning to do the work that the land required, which was considerable since he was building it from bare ground into something productive. He had planted a kitchen garden and was breaking new ground for a larger plot. He had acquired 2 horses, a milk cow that Thomas named Empress, and a dozen chickens that Lily managed with the organizational efficiency she brought to everything. In the evenings he came home, and there was supper and the children's stories and the lamplight, and he sat at the table in the way of a man who had arrived somewhere he had been trying to get for a long time. Eva watched him with her children and felt the truth of what he had said to her, that it was not a burden he was carrying but a life he was grateful for. And she understood that it was genuine in the same way she understood that gravity was genuine, simply by the evidence of how it operated. She worked less frantically now, though she still worked, because idleness did not suit her and because what she earned was genuinely useful. She helped Mrs. Hartwell with the curtains and the mending. She started a small kitchen garden of her own that she expanded as the season allowed. She learned the land alongside Andrew, the particular qualities of the soil and the water and the way the wind came through in the afternoon, and she found that she loved it with a specific, earned love that was different from how she had loved the farm in San Marcos, because this time she had not inherited it but built it. The summer passed in work and heat, and the particular sweetness of a life that was difficult in practical ways but abundant in everything that mattered. There were problems, because life reliably produces problems, and Andrew and Eva dealt with them in the way of people who have decided to deal with things together, which is to say with some difficulty and some disagreement and considerable ultimate success. The first disagreement was about money. Eva had been managing her own finances for 3 years and had strong opinions about how it should be done, and Andrew had been managing his own affairs for considerably longer and also had opinions. They sat at the kitchen table one August evening after the children were asleep and worked it out with a frankness that was sometimes uncomfortable and invariably productive, and they arrived at an arrangement they both found reasonable, and neither of them pretended the conversation had been entirely easy. The second was about Thomas's cough, which had been on and off since before the wedding and which worried Eva more than she liked to say. Andrew took her concerns seriously, which was important, and they brought Thomas to the doctor in Millhaven, who said it was nothing dangerous, likely dust from the dry summer, and recommended certain remedies and fresh air, both of which the land was well placed to provide. The cough improved through September and was largely gone by October, and Eva breathed easier in more than the literal sense. There were good days and harder days, as there always are. There was the day in September when a dust storm came through and undid 2 weeks of work in the garden, and Andrew came in from fighting it with his jaw set in the way she had learned meant he was holding himself very steady, and she made coffee and sat with him at the table and let him be angry about it without trying to fix the anger, and then they went to bed and started again the next morning. There was the morning in October when Lily came downstairs and showed Eva a drawing she had done of the family, 4 figures on the porch of the house, and said, "I drew Andrew in the family picture. Is that all right?" And Eva had to put down her coffee cup and hold her daughter for a moment before she could answer. And the answer was yes, of course it was. Of course it was entirely right. Andrew taught Thomas to ride in October, which was an enterprise that absorbed every piece of Thomas's considerable energy and most of Andrew's patience, and which concluded successfully in the sense that Thomas could stay on a horse and steer it in the intended direction, and triumphantly in the sense that Thomas's joy in the accomplishment was so complete and so enthusiastic that it was impossible not to share it. He taught Lily to use a compass, which she had asked about, and they went out on Sunday afternoons and took readings and mapped the property in her sketchbook with a serious precision that Andrew clearly respected and encouraged. She drew better all the time, and he found her more paper when she ran out, and he hung one of her bird drawings on the wall of the front room with the same care that other people give to things of considerable value. November came with cold, and the particular quiet of the Texas plains, when the summer rush of growth and heat has subsided. Eva sat one evening by the fire while Andrew read to the children from a book of stories he had found at the general store, a new purchase that had surprised her because she had not known he was a man who thought to buy books, and then she thought about it and realized she should not have been surprised at all, because he was precisely the kind of man who thought to buy books. Lily was asleep against his arm before the second story finished. Thomas lasted slightly longer, fighting it with the dogged determination of a child who knows sleep is coming and resents the fact. And then he was gone too, and Andrew was left sitting very still between them so as not to wake them, with a look on his face that Eva saw from across the room. She went and sat beside him, and he looked at her over the sleeping heads of her children with an expression that was so unguarded that she felt it like a hand pressed flat against her heart. "Are you happy?" she asked, because she needed to know, not from doubt but from something that felt like wanting to be certain of a good thing. "Yes," he said. The word was simple and complete and entirely credible. "More than I know how to say." "You say it well enough," she told him. He moved Lily carefully, settling her against the back of the chair, and then he reached across and took Eva's hand in his, and they sat in the firelight while the children slept, and the wind moved outside the house. And she thought about the morning in the boarding-house room in April when she had buried her last coin under the floorboard and had understood with terrible clarity that she had nothing left. And she thought about how strange and extraordinary it was to sit here now in the warmth and the light with this man's hand around hers and these two children sleeping, and this house around them all. And she felt a gratitude so specific and so present that it almost hurt. Winter in Millhaven in 1878 was cold but manageable, and they were better prepared for it than Eva had been the year before. Andrew had laid in wood and supplies. The root cellar was stocked. The animals were bedded in. The house was warm, and in the evenings it was warm in the other sense too, the sense that has to do with the quality of light and laughter, and the way a home feels when the people in it are genuinely glad to be there. Christmas they celebrated simply. Eva made a fruit cake from a recipe her mother had kept, and Agnes came out with her husband Frank, who was a taciturn man but a good one, and the children received small gifts and were happy in the specific way of children for whom happiness is not contingent on scale. Andrew had made Thomas a wooden horse that was considerably more accomplished than the first one, and Thomas received it with speechless reverence. For Lily he had found a new sketchbook with better paper, and she opened it and looked at the blank pages with the expression of someone confronting unlimited possibility. For Eva he had made something himself. He gave it to her in the evening after the children were in bed, a small carved box of good walnut wood, fitted with a lid that had been worked into a pattern of leaves. It was beautiful in the particular way of things made by hand by someone who has taken time and cared about the outcome. "For your hairpins," he said, because he had noticed long ago that she kept them in a small cloth pouch that was falling apart at the seam. "And whatever else." She opened the lid and closed it and looked at the carving on top and then looked at him, and the thing she said was not in words. He kissed her, and she kissed him back, and the fire in the hearth did what fire does in winter, which is provide light and warmth and a reasonable substitute for everything that is cold and dark outside. January was the hardest month. The cold deepened, and there was a week of weather that kept them mostly indoors, which tested everyone's patience and goodwill in the particular ways that prolonged close quarters will. Thomas developed cabin fever that expressed itself in a creative range of inexplicable activities, including the attempted rehabilitation of a field mouse he had found near the woodpile. Eva and Andrew had their most serious argument of the marriage over something that in the telling sounds small but in the living felt large. A disagreement about the spring planting that was really a disagreement about fear and control, and the particular ways that both of them had learned to hold the things that mattered to them tightly, because the world had not always been reliable about letting them keep those things. They said things in the heat of the argument that required the next day's apologies, and they made those apologies, and the conversation that followed was one of the most honest and therefore most difficult, and therefore most valuable they had yet had. They came out of it closer and more precise in their understanding of each other, and Eva thought that this too was part of what it meant to build something real, that it required not the absence of friction but the willingness to work through it. February brought a thaw, and with it, the particular lift in spirits that comes when the worst of the cold begins to recede. The children burst outdoors with an energy that had been compressed for weeks, and the property absorbed it with the indifference of land that has seen everything and is not especially impressed. It was in February that Eva began to suspect, and in March that she was certain, and in March that she told Andrew. She told him in the evening, matter-of-factly, because she had found that this was the best way to tell things that were large and significant, to say them plainly and let the size of them settle on their own. He looked at her, and then he did something she had not expected. He sat down, directly where he was, which happened to be the middle of the kitchen floor, in the manner of a man whose legs have suggested that sitting is the appropriate response to current events. "You are sitting on the kitchen floor," she observed. "Yes," he said. He looked up at her with an expression she had never seen on him before, which was entirely new and entirely extraordinary, a kind of stunned and radiant disbelief. She came and sat beside him on the kitchen floor, because it seemed the right thing to do, and he put his arms around her and held her very carefully, like something he was afraid of breaking, and then she felt him exhale a breath that seemed to contain a great deal more than air. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I am very, very all right," he said in a voice that was not entirely steady. "I am—" He stopped. She waited. "I have wanted this for a very long time," he said. "A family, children, this. I did not know if it would happen." "It's happening," she said. His arms tightened. "Yes," he said, "it is." They sat on the kitchen floor for a little while longer, and neither of them suggested getting up. He told Lily and Thomas the following evening at supper, because Eva thought they should know and thought he should be the one to tell them, though she couldn't have precisely said why. She simply felt that it was right, and feeling things were right had become a thing she trusted. Andrew looked at both children across the table and said, "Your mother and I have something to tell you. You are going to have a brother or sister." Thomas absorbed this information the way he absorbed most information, with a brief processing pause followed by a direct practical question. "When?" "In the autumn," Andrew said. Thomas considered this. "That is a long time." "It is," Andrew agreed. Lily was very quiet, which was unusual enough to be notable. Eva watched her and waited. "Will you still have time for us?" Lily asked finally. She did not look up when she asked it, and the question was so specific and so honest that it cost something to hear it. Andrew put down his fork and gave Lily his full attention, which was the thing she needed from him and knew how to recognize. "Yes," he said, "always. A baby doesn't change what you and Thomas mean to me, not one bit." Lily looked up. "Do you promise?" "I promise," he said, and held her gaze so she could read the truth of it. Lily nodded, satisfied. Then she said, "I hope it is a boy. Thomas and I have discussed it. We believe we have sufficient experience managing a boy and would find a girl more challenging." Eva pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. "We will accept whatever we get," Andrew said with admirable gravity, "and manage accordingly." "That is reasonable," Lily allowed, and returned to her supper. Spring arrived in full in April, and with it the first anniversary of the morning Eva had buried her coin under the floorboard. She did not mark the date aloud, but she thought about it on that particular morning, standing in the kitchen of her own house with the April light coming through the window, and she thought about the distance between that morning and this one, not in miles but in everything else. She put her hand on her stomach, which was just beginning to show, and she thought about the word prospects, which she had applied to herself with such bleak accuracy a year ago, and which seemed now to mean an entirely different thing. The land came alive in April and May. Andrew worked it with an intensity that was also, she had come to understand, a form of love. He was building something from this ground, not just for himself but for all of them, and she could see it in the way he looked at the new growth in the garden, or walked the fence line at dusk with Thomas beside him, the boy's small hand in his large one, both of them looking at the same horizon with the same expression. Lily finished her primer in May, exactly as she had predicted she would. Andrew found her a more advanced reader at a bookshop in a larger town a day's ride away, which he made specifically for this purpose on a Saturday, and he came back with the reader, and with a small journal with a better clasp than the one she had, and Lily received both with the composure of someone who had fully expected this outcome, but appreciated it nonetheless. The summer was warm and full, and the work was hard, and the evenings were sweet. Eva grew rounder and slower, and Andrew grew more attentive in a way that she had to occasionally redirect, because she was not made of glass and said so, and he conceded the point with a smile but watched her anyway with the steady, quiet care that was simply his nature. The neighbors who had initially regarded the Townsend family with the combination of curiosity and reserve that small communities apply to newcomers had by summer become simply neighbors, people who waved from the road and sent things when someone was unwell and expected the same in return. Mrs. Hartwell had become something close to a friend, a sharp-minded, warm-hearted woman who came to supper occasionally and always left with something Eva had baked, and who had told Eva in September of the previous year, in her direct way, that Andrew Townsend was a good man, and that good men were not as common as people sometimes assumed, and that Eva had done well by them both. Eva had thought about that afterward and decided Mrs. Hartwell was right. There were things she thought about that were harder than the good things. She thought about Daniel sometimes, not with grief exactly anymore, but with the particular tenderness that the passage of time applies to loss, smoothing it into something softer and less sharp. She thought about who he would have been to these children as they grew, and she thought about the particular cruelty of illness and the arbitrary nature of who it took. She had spoken to Andrew about this once carefully, because she wanted to be honest with him about the whole of her inner life and not just the comfortable parts. He had listened with the quality of attention he gave to everything that mattered. And then he had said, "I'm not trying to replace him. That wouldn't be possible, and I wouldn't want it to be. He was their father and your husband, and he was real. I'm just here, trying to be what they need now." She had loved him very much at that moment, which was not unusual, but the quality of it had been particularly clear. The baby came in September, exactly when they had expected, with an efficiency that Eva privately attributed to the baby's understanding that his mother had a schedule to keep. It was a boy, sturdy and dark-haired and loud from the first moment, and Andrew held him in the bedroom while Eva rested and said, in a very quiet voice that she could hear because she was not actually asleep, "Hello. You are the best thing I have ever seen. I know that's a big thing to say, but it's true." She did not tell him she had heard that. She simply lay still and let him have the moment, which was his by right. They named him James Daniel Townsend. The Daniel was Eva's choice, and Andrew had agreed to it immediately without making her explain, which she appreciated. James was a loud and hungry and thoroughly present baby who announced his opinions on all subjects with a volume that suggested he had not come into this world to be overlooked. Thomas found him fascinating in the way that small boys find things that are smaller than themselves both interesting and slightly alarming. Lily immediately assumed a supervisory role that the baby, for the first several weeks, was too young to resist. Andrew, with James, was the same as he was with Lily and Thomas, patient and genuine and unaffectedly delighted. He got up in the night without being asked, and he held the baby in the evenings with the ease of a man who had always been doing this, which in some essential sense she thought he had been, or had been waiting to. One evening in October, when James was 6 weeks old and had finally achieved a reliable sleeping schedule, and Eva was sitting in the front room feeling the particular exhaustion of new motherhood mixed with an equivalent contentment, Andrew came and sat beside her on the sofa they had acquired in the summer. "I have been thinking," he said. "That sounds like something that should be announced carefully," she said. He smiled. "I want to add the rooms I mentioned to the house. A proper room for Lily and Thomas separately and a nursery, and I'd like to put in a real kitchen." "That's ambitious." "I have the plans drawn out," he said. "I've been working on them since August." He paused. "I wanted to wait until James was here so I knew what we needed." She looked at him. The lamplight was very kind in October, warm and low, and his face in it was the face of a man she knew entirely and found more interesting every day. "You have been drawing house plans since August," she said, "in the evenings when you were asleep." "Andrew, I know I should have told you." "Yes, you should have. I wanted it to be certain before I raised hopes." She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had drawn plans in secret to make a bigger room for her children, and had said nothing until he was sure. This man who had sat on the kitchen floor when she told him about the baby, and had held her as though she were something extraordinary. This man who had caught her son when he fell and bought her daughter a book about birds, and said, "I have always wanted a family," with the directness of someone who does not say things he does not mean. "Show me the plans," she said. He brought them out from where he had kept them folded in a book on the shelf, pages of careful pencil drawings, neat and precise, and they spread them on the table and went over them together in the lamplight while James slept in the basket by the fire, and the autumn wind moved outside the house. And she looked at the rooms he had drawn for her children and the kitchen he had planned for her, and she thought, "This is the life. Not a life without difficulty, not a life without the hard things that come to every life, but a life in which the hard things were shared and the good things were made together, and in which she was not alone in the way she had been alone that April morning in the boarding house, in the way she had been alone on the farm in San Marcos, working against a world that did not seem to have been designed with her in mind. She was not alone now. She was here in this house on this land with this man and 2 children who were growing and a baby who was sleeping, and plans for rooms that had not yet been built but would be. "I like the kitchen," she said. "I thought you would. I have suggestions." "I expected that." She looked up at him. He was smiling, the full smile that she had catalogued and considered one of the finest things about him. She put her hand over his on the table. "Build it," she said. Construction on the additions began the following spring, when James was 6 months old and sitting up and regarding the world with the intent, bright-eyed attention of a person who has recently arrived and has a great deal of catching up to do. Andrew hired 2 men from town to help, and worked alongside them himself on every day that weather and time allowed. The house expanded outward through April and May, and the children watched it with the absorbed interest of people observing a world being built for them. Lily got her room in June. It was not large, but it had a window that faced the garden and good light in the mornings, and she arranged it with the methodical precision she applied to all organizational challenges. Books in one place and drawing materials in another, and her growing collection of bird feathers, arranged along the windowsill with a taxonomy that was entirely her own. Thomas got his room too, which he immediately filled with the accumulated treasures of 18 months of outdoor exploration, rocks and sticks, and the dried shell of something unidentifiable, and now secured in a small wooden crate that Andrew had made for the purpose, a tortoise named Governor that he had found at the creek, and adopted with an attachment that had proven impossible to argue him out of. The kitchen was exactly what Eva had described she wanted, with better counter space and a proper storage area, and a window over the wash basin that she had specified herself. And she stood in it, the morning it was completed, and ran her hand along the new counter and thought about every inadequate kitchen she had worked in, and found this one deeply, personally satisfying. The summer of 1879 was a good summer. Not without its difficulties, because the land required constant attention and the children required more, and running a household on a working farm was not a restful enterprise, but good in the essential sense. Andrew's planting was productive. The kitchen garden provided generously, and James, who had taken his first unsteady steps in July, was mobile now in the terrifying way of recently ambulatory babies who have not yet developed any meaningful awareness of their own limitations. Eva watched her family through that summer with the particular attention of someone who knows the difference between having a life and appreciating one. She watched Andrew lift James above his head and catch the baby's delighted shriek with a laugh of his own. She watched him sit with Lily at the table and look at her drawings with genuine attention, pointing out the details she had captured well and asking questions about the ones he didn't recognize. She watched him and Thomas come in from the evening chores together, the man's hand on the boy's shoulder, both of them dirty and satisfied in the way of people who have accomplished something that mattered. She thought about the word prospects, which she had applied to herself with such precise bleakness on that April morning in 1878. She had had 2 children and no prospects. She had thought of herself as a quantity of liabilities organized into a human shape, and she had been wrong, not because her circumstances were not what they were, but because prospects, it turned out, are not something that circumstances give you or take away, but something that arrives in the form of a man ducking through a doorframe and catching your son before he hits the floor, and then standing up and meeting your eyes with honesty. Andrew came in from the barn one August evening, the last light burning behind him, and found her on the porch. James was asleep inside. Lily and Thomas were doing what they were supposed to be doing, which was getting ready for bed and probably not quite succeeding. He came and sat beside her on the porch bench that he had built in the spring, the one that faced west and caught the evening air. "Long day," she said. "Good day," he said. They sat together and watched the last color drain from the sky, the deep orange going to pink and then to the particular blue that precedes dark, and the first stars appearing as they always did with the quality of small, reliable miracles. She thought about telling him what she had been thinking, about prospects, about April of last year, about all of it. She thought about putting it into words and decided that the words were not necessary, because he was here and she was here, and the house was behind them, and the children were in it, and all of that said the thing more completely than words could. He put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, and the Texas evening opened around them, wide and full of stars and the sound of crickets and the distant low complaint of Empress the cow. And somewhere inside the house, Thomas dropped something and there was a muffled exclamation, and then Lily's voice, precise and carrying, explaining exactly what Thomas had done wrong and how he should correct it. Andrew made a sound that was almost but not quite a laugh. "She is going to run something significant one day," he said. "A town, possibly, or a country." "I have no doubt," Eva said. "Thomas will be all right, too. He has good instincts with animals, and he is kind." "He is," she agreed. "He gets that from someone." He glanced at her, and she could see the small, private smile. He did not deflect the compliment as he might once have done. He had gotten better at receiving things gracefully, and she had noticed this, the particular way he was learning to let himself be seen and valued without immediately redirecting the conversation. "James will be loud and determined," she said. "We may as well accept it." "I accept it completely," Andrew said, with a warmth that suggested he found this prospect specifically appealing rather than merely tolerable. Inside, Thomas had apparently resolved whatever the drop thing situation had been, because Lily's supervisory commentary had subsided and quiet had returned. "Andrew," Eva said, "are you happy still? I want to keep asking." He looked at her in the evening light. His face in the near dark was the face she had been memorizing for over a year and still found worth studying. The jaw and the eyes and the mouth that smiled more easily now than it had in April of last year, as though happiness had settled into the lines of him and made itself at home. "Yes," he said, "completely." He paused, and then added with the honesty that had always been one of the things she valued most in him, "I am happier than I knew I was capable of being." She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, large and certain and warm. "Good," she said. "So am I." They sat on the porch of the house they had built together until the dark was full and the stars were bright overhead, the wide Texas sky doing what it always did, which was to make everything below it look appropriately small and appropriately cherished. And the sounds from inside the house told them their children were safe and present, and the land around them was theirs, and the life they had made from nothing and difficulty, and one tall man ducking through a doorframe was real and whole and there, entirely there. Not a hope or a future thing, but a present, living, breathing, laughing, difficult, beautiful fact. Thomas appeared at the door in his nightclothes to announce that he could not sleep, and that Governor the tortoise appeared to also be having trouble sleeping, and that both of them would benefit from a brief period of company. Andrew rose and took the boy inside without complaint, and Eva heard Thomas's voice and then Andrew's voice and then, gradually, quiet, and she sat for a little longer in the dark. She thought about Daniel, and she thought about the farm in San Marcos, and she thought about the boarding house room in Millhaven and the coin under the floorboard, and the long, careful reckoning of those months when everything was possible and nothing was certain. She did not think any of these things with bitterness. They were part of the story, and the story had come to this porch and this night and this man inside putting her son to bed, and she would not trade a piece of it because all of it had been necessary to arrive here. Andrew came back out and stood in the doorway. "He's asleep," he said. "Governor appears to have settled as well." "Thank you," she said. He came and held out his hand to her, palm up, an offering and an invitation both. She looked at it for a moment, at the work-roughened lines of it, the hand that had caught Thomas when he fell, that had built the rooms of this house and curved around a baby and drawn house plans in secret by lamplight and slid a ring onto her finger in June sunlight. She put her hand in his. He helped her up, and they went inside together, and he closed the door on the night, and the house was warm and full and complete. The autumn of 1879 settled gently over the land south of Millhaven. The garden went to seed and was put to bed for the year, the provisions stored, the animals settled for cooler weather. Andrew and Eva sat at the kitchen table in the evenings after the children slept and talked about the spring planting, and the fence that needed mending on the east side, and whether to acquire a second milk cow, and what Lily might need for continued schooling when the town established a proper school, which there were plans to do in the coming year. They talked about James, who was proving to be exactly what Eva had predicted, loud and determined and very funny about it, a boy with a sunny disposition and very strong opinions about his food. They talked about the future in the easy way of people who have decided that the future is something to be shaped rather than feared. One evening in November, when the first real cold had come and the fire was going well and James was asleep and the older children were doing the quiet things they did in evenings before bed, Andrew looked at her across the table and said, in the tone of a man raising something he has been holding quietly for some time, "Are you satisfied with all of it?" She looked at him. "Are you asking because you're not sure of the answer or because you want to hear it said?" "Both," he admitted. She considered how to answer him honestly and completely, which was the only way she knew how to answer him. "I have had a life that was very hard for a long time," she said. "And I have had a life for this last year and a half that has been hard in different ways and extraordinary in ways I did not allow myself to expect." She looked at the fire and at her children and then back at him. "I am satisfied," she said. "I am more than satisfied. I am grateful every day." He nodded slowly, absorbing this. "Why do you ask?" she said. He reached into his coat pocket, which was hanging on the chair back, and brought out an envelope. "Because I put in an offer on the adjacent property," he said. 40 acres east of us. The Moody place. Old Ben Moody is moving to San Antonio to live with his daughter." He set the envelope on the table. "The offer was accepted today. If you are satisfied, then I should also tell you that I am planning on being here a very, very long time and I want to have room for it." She stared at him. 40 acres. Good grazing land. The Eastern Creek runs through it. "Andrew, I know I should have discussed it first." "Yes. I wanted to be certain it was possible before." "Yes, you always want to be certain first," she said. She pressed her lips together and looked at the envelope and then at him. "Is it done?" "It's done." She was quiet, then she said, "You are going to consult me before doing significant things." "I am," he agreed, "because this is a partnership." "It is, I know that." He looked for the word. Optimism. I was optimistic. She looked at him for a long moment, trying to hold the severity of the expression she was going for, and found she could not do it. The smile came and she let it, and his face opened with it in the way it always did. 40 acres, she said. Room to grow, he said. She looked at the children by the fire. Lily bent over her sketchbook, Thomas asleep against the chair arm with Governor tucked beside him in the improbable way he had. And she looked at the door to the room where James was sleeping, and she thought about the land outside and the 40 new acres of it and the spring that would come and the years after it. "We're going to need more hands," she said, "if we work 40 acres properly." "I know, I have ideas about that too." "I am sure you do." She looked at him. "Tell me tomorrow. Tonight just sit here." He put the envelope back in his coat pocket and settled in his chair, and she settled in hers, and the fire went on in the way that fires do, and the children were peaceful, and the house held all of them the way a house does when it has been built with intention and lived in with care. Outside, the Texas night was wide and cold and full of stars, the same stars that had been over this land before any of them had come to it and would be over it long after. But that was all right. Some things are large and some things are immediate, and the immediate things, the lamp and the warmth and the man across the table and the children by the fire and the baby sleeping in the next room, are not diminished by the large ones. They are, if anything, made more precisely themselves by the contrast. Eva Rourke, who had become Eva Townsend on a July afternoon under a live oak tree with wildflowers in her hand, sat in her kitchen in November of 1879 and knew, with a certainty that required no examination, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had come here with 2 children and nothing left, and the particular courage of a woman who has no remaining option but to go forward. And going forward had led here, to this table and this man and this life that was larger than she had dared to imagine. She looked across the table at Andrew, who was looking at her with the expression she had catalogued as the one he wore when he was content, the quiet, settled look of a man who has arrived somewhere he was always trying to reach. "Andrew," she said. "Yes, I love you," he said it back. He said it the way he said everything that mattered, directly and without ornamentation, and she received it the same way. The fire burned. The children slept and drew and existed in their particular ways. James would wake in an hour and be hungry, and someone would get up, probably Andrew, because he was inclined to let her sleep when he could manage it. Tomorrow there would be work and the ordinary difficulties of an ordinary day, and they would meet them together. It was enough. It was, in fact, more than enough. It was everything. And on the land south of Millhaven, Texas, in the last months of 1879, the Townsend family was as real and as whole and as permanent as the land itself. 4 people who had found each other through a doorframe and a falling boy and 2 hairpins and a coin under a floorboard, making something together that none of them could have made alone, and knowing it and being glad.